Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Welcome to episode 34 of Fire Code Tech. This episode is sponsored by Wachter. Check in later on in the show and we'll be thanking and talking about our sponsors and the opportunities with Wachter. On this episode, we have Chris Campbell. In this episode with Chris, we're talking about how to pass the fire protection engineering exam. We'll be discussing hot topics like what does an effective study habit look like for passing the test. Also, we'll break into Chris's new foray into having his own consulting practice and what it looks like to be an entrepreneur in fire protection. If you're interested in tips and tricks for passing professional exams and talking about everything involved with the test and what you need to do to make sure you pass, this is the episode for you. Had a great time talking with Chris about not only his new ventures in the FPE prep space and consulting, but he also has some great tips for professional development. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode and follow us on social media. Oh, and if you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, that would be a big help. Well, hello, Chris. Welcome back to the show. Our first repeat guest ever on Fire Code Tech. How's it going today?
Hey, Gus. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me again. It's great to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I've been excited to talk to you. I've gotten a bunch of professionals, reaching out on LinkedIn and other social media about the FPE exam, and I know you've had a lot of big changes in your last year, so yeah, excited to talk to you about all you've been working on. But yeah, I just wanted to get started with you telling the listeners a little bit about all the big changes and the cool stuff that you've been working on over the last year, just kind of to kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can just start in the PE exam world. So last year, put out a product called the PE Roadmap, which was really a study guide and study schedule that kind of broke down all the necessary topics on the fire protection PE exam and gave people a real week by week study schedule of review these things this week and do these practice problems, etc. And if you get through the whole thing, you'll be in a really good spot for the exam. And did that in collaboration with Joe Meyer, and Joe's got a number of different exam prep materials. He's got a prep book as well as a series of questions that you can subscribe to that really mimic the PE exam style questions. So I did that last year, and then sometime over the winter, in talking with Joe, we kind of decided that it made a lot of sense for the PE roadmap, so that study schedule and the week by week guide would make a lot of sense to put into the Meyer Fire Prep book. So we came to an arrangement, and starting this year in 2021, that entire PE roadmap document, so the full study schedule, is now included in the Meyer Fire Prep book. So anyone who has that for this year, 2021, can make use of that in the front of Joe's book there. And then I wanted to continue to grow my offering for the PE exam prep market. So this year have released a new product called the Video Roadmap, which just kind of building on that roadmap name, but it's actually a completely different product. So the Video Roadmap series is recorded videos of me going through 200 PE exam practice problems that Joe Meyer puts out, and giving the full solution to those problems step by step. So what I do is I've got a one video camera on me, and then I've got another downward facing camera on a pen and paper, and then I'm also sharing my screen, and I've got this kind of 4-screen view going on. and just go through each of these practice problems step by step and explain out loud how I do it. What are all the resources that I use to solve the problem? I actually show my work on the paper, so writing out all the equations, talking it out loud. So um, we're halfway through that. So this coming week will be week 10 of the 20-week series. It's 10 questions a week for 20 weeks. And yeah, that's been really good. Have gotten a lot of good feedback on that so far, and a lot of people seem to really appreciate and enjoy, being able to watch me go through these problems step by step and kind of talk through my thought process. So yeah, hopefully that is a really good benefit to people who are studying for the exam this year.
Man, that's awesome. That sounds like people always ask for advice from me, about taking the FPE exam, and first and foremost, I always just tell them to do as many practice problems as they can. And something that I believe that you've touched on with this new um, kind of like PE roadmap video series is like how to show people how to do the most important thing to pass the exam, which is how to do the problems. So I think that's like the biggest struggle. You've touched on a couple of the huge struggles is how do I get started? How do I know if I'm doing well? And then, how to do these problems is difficult. And there's really not very many options out there. I mean, there's more now than there's ever been, but I don't feel like there are very many in the space that are really doing this kind of thing. So I think you've touched on some big pain points for um, the FPE prep space and people trying to get started and get studying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely agree. Just simply doing practice problems is a really important part of your exam prep. Um, it's a unique environment where you've got a long list of problems, and on average, you have 6 minutes to complete the problem. So you really need to do a lot of practice problems to simulate that exam environment where you have to quickly read the problem, determine what resources do you need to look for or look through, whether it's the NCS manual that's provided or maybe it's one of the reference code or standards, and then find the correct resource or the correct equation and then actually solve it. So, um, in the work environment, we typically do not operate on 6 minute time limits per question. If a client asks me a question, it's um, they appreciate a prompt response, but it usually is not expected to be in 6 minutes. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to just get a lot of practice time, like you said, just doing exam style problems, so you're comfortable doing that when it comes to exam day.
Yeah, so I want to, break in more of this topic of the FPE exam and just different ideas around it. But one thing I wanted to ask you is and maybe this is inherent to the roadmap, but what is a good study habit for the FP exam look like? Yeah, I have had people ask me, and I have my own opinion on this subject, but um, I'm sure you have well refined ideas about this by now after 2 years almost in the books in this space.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think starting off your study period, so hopefully it's well in advance of the exam. The materials that I put out, as well as Joe Meyer's materials, and I think also the SFP review course, all of those start early June. So that's about 20 weeks in advance of the actual exam day in October. So it doesn't mean you have to start that early, but I think it is advantageous to get an early start if you can. But from the beginning would be establishing a good study schedule. And, that was actually the motivation behind the original P roadmap that I did last year. Was a lot of people would just kind of go into their exam preparation blindly, and maybe they're just doing a lot of practice problems, which is good, but at the same time, I think there's a benefit to having a system in place so that you're covering all of your bases in terms of the potential content that's on the exam. So, what I think that could look like for uh, anyone who is planning to take the exam is reviewing the exam specification, that NCS puts out, which goes over all of the major topics that's on the exam. And it also gives you an approximate breakdown of the weighting of those topics, right? So a very common topic such as fire suppression systems, you're typically going to have more questions on fire suppression systems than you would on, let's say, explosion protection, which is just it's a less weighted topic. So looking through the exam specification and then evaluating where you stand with all those particular subjects. So, for me, I do a lot of life safety and means of egress type consulting. So I feel pretty comfortable answering questions on that topic, whereas I don't do a lot of explosion venting, for example, in my day to day. So I would probably need to spend a little more time studying topics like that. So going through, looking at the exam specification, identifying where you stand on it, and then setting up a schedule based on that. And if anyone can obviously do that on their own, that's what I did in the PE roadmap. And there's a few different ways to do that. I've published a 20-week study schedule. I also have a condensed study schedule in the roadmap that's 8 weeks, so a more abbreviated schedule. But really setting that up for yourself, obviously tailoring it to your specific situation for what your prior knowledge is and your experience level, and then also making it doable for your schedule. Most people are going to take a vacation at some point during the summer. I would not advocate studying for 20 weeks straight and taking zero breaks. I don't think that's sustainable for most people, and you're likely to probably get off track. So building in some breaks, building in time to review, giving yourself a little flexibility. But that would be the first thing overall is setting up a study schedule, and then the second piece would simply just be executing on that. You could spend a ton of time putting together a great schedule, but if you don't actually do it, doesn't do you a lot of good. So, setting up the schedule, making it something that you think is doable for your schedule and your current lifestyle, and then just doing it every week. When I took the PE exam, it was a computer-based exam, so it was a pen and paper exam, and the way that I studied was I set aside a chunk of time, typically on Saturday mornings, and I knew I was going to hit probably a 3 to 4 hour block of studying every Saturday morning. So I would just prepare for that each week. I knew which topic I was going to be doing, and during that morning block of time would cover that topic, do as many practice problems on that topic as I could, and just make sure I understood what they could be asking related to that given topic. During the week, I had typically 2 evenings set aside, so like a Tuesday and a Thursday evening, where I would try to get in a 2-hour block of studying as well, and continue on with additional practice problems and additional review. So that was the schedule that worked for me. I was able to stick to that, but I think you get the picture of set up a schedule and a routine that works for you, and then one that you can actually stick to and execute on week after week. I think if you do that, most folks are going to be in a good position to pass the exam.
Wow, a lot of great takeaways in that last little chunk. I think so many people get stuck in analysis paralysis about like how much content there is to cover and how am I going to get through it, and evaluating your strengths and weaknesses and then setting up a plan to study and maybe hit those topics where you're not as strong in, first, and maybe repeat them is a great tip. And so I think there's a lot of great nuggets of wisdom in that last little bit of exposition about what a study habit looks like. Some people might not know. I honestly didn't really figure out how to study well until I started taking these professional exams. So I mean, I made it all the way through college without like having to be that detailed or analytical about the test subject or time management. So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the topic of the course, yeah, would you speak a little bit more about? I mean, you gave it great. I can kind of picture it in my head, the top down, like how you're working and the PE roadmap and how that couples together. But could you break down a little bit more about like what's involved with the course. If people are who are starting to study now are interested and want to get involved now, like, can they still do that? Or like, just go over a little bit more about the course and what's entailed and like what you're offering with these videos.
Sure. Yeah, so people can definitely still register. We're still over 10 weeks out from the exam. So, I'm sure there are people that still have not yet registered. So the course is definitely available. Um, the roadmap video series it goes hand in hand with Joe Meyer's prep series, which is that um, 20 weeks of 10 questions a week of these exam style problems. So Joe is the one that produces those questions. And then folks who subscribe to my course are able to watch me go through the solutions to all 200 of those problems. So I publish those videos weekly to coincide with the Meyer Fire Prep Series schedule. So if you subscribe now, weeks 1 through 9 are available. And then, starting in week 10 and then each subsequent week, I release those on a weekly basis. So it's meant to go hand in hand with Joe's prep series, but I think the real advantage of the videos is that, to my knowledge, there is not any other PE resource that gives you live recorded solutions like that. There certainly are resources that give you an answer key, such as the NCS practice exam. Anyone can purchase that on the NCS website, and that comes with an answer key in the back of the book. Um, and for many problems, that is sufficient. Like, it's pretty readily obvious what they're describing in the written answer key. But almost everyone that I've met who's studied for the PE exam has had many practice problems where the answer key is really not enough. They don't understand why a certain assumption was made, or maybe why this equation was used, not this one, something like that. Or they just don't understand a certain step within the calculation. My video series aims to bridge that gap of, I am recording myself reading the problem. I'm looking through the various reference materials, whether it's the NCS reference guide or one of the NFPA codes or standards. And I'm actually recording myself, flipping through the document and recording myself trying to find the right equation. You recently took the exam, so you can probably speak to this, but it's not always readily apparent what is the right equation to use. So
Yeah.
sometimes, you spend a couple of minutes just looking through trying to find the right equation. So I'm recording myself doing that whole process, and I'm narrating it all along the way. So describing what I'm thinking as, okay, this equation looks like it might be the right one, but we don't actually know this input, so we need to look for something else, that sort of thing. And then also going from there to the actual calculation steps. So, like I mentioned before, I have this downward facing camera, and I'm actually writing out every step of the equation by hand, and that's all recorded on the video. So you can see me writing out the calculation steps, checking my units. I actually record myself, entering the numbers into the calculator, getting the answer. So I'm doing all the steps that someone in the exam would have to do. I'm doing it on the video series and talking through it the whole way. So, to my knowledge, like I said, I don't think there's any other resource that has that type of guidance in terms of video and recorded solutions. So, I think it's been a big benefit so far. The feedback, so far this year has been pretty good, and hopefully that translates to many or all of my clients passing the exam this year as well. So hopefully it's a good resource for them.
Yeah, I think what you've touched on, and maybe you feel this way too, but I feel like if I want to learn how to do anything, I just go and like search it on Google and like watch a video about it. And so, like, the format that you're offering people is like the way in which a lot of people who are of the generation to be taking the test right now are used to, absorbing information in that way. Like, watching a video, like rewinding it back, like making sure they understand it in kind of. So I think that that's really interesting and definitely resonates with the way that I like to learn. So that's cool to hear you speak about that. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the feedback so far has been good, but I think the real, um, proof of its value would be in a very good pass rate for people. So we'll wait to see on that. The computer based exam was introduced last year for the first time, and there was a historically higher than normal pass rate, which we could certainly get into a speculation contest on why that was. But at any rate, the my guess would be that this year the pass rate would be a little bit lower than last year, just because there seemed to be kind of this abnormal spike last year. Um, but at any rate, the exam I think is definitely passable to folks who do the type of preparation that we've been talking about here. So hopefully, the people that have taken the time to go through my series or Joe Meyer's materials as well, hopefully they do very well this year.
Yeah, I think that's great. I wanted to speak with you about that, like the computer-based testing. I mean, I got to take the last paper-based test, so I kind of missed out on, the way things are going to be from now on. Part of me wishes I would have gotten to take that computer-based testing, so then I would have some idea. But yeah, I think it's so wild that anomaly of the pass rate being historically in the 60s or the low 60s or maybe even lower, I think. And then shooting up to like the 80s or something is pretty wild. Um, so yeah, I would love to hear like what you think about how CBT or computer-based testing has changed the game. And I mean, like, I don't even really understand how the references and like interface and all that works with the new exam as compared to lugging in a tote of books, which I'm sure people are already tired of hearing me talk about my cart full of book story. But
Right. Well, I certainly have a similar story. I took the exam in California, and I had to fly to get to the exam site. So I had a regular bag with my clothes in it, and I had a separate bag, full 50-pound suitcase full of books and standards and references. So sounds like we had a similar experience.
yeah,
One thing with that too is that I spent so much time during the study season tabbing. So putting in these tabs in the various codes and standards, because you're literally bringing in a hard copy of those into the exam. So if you can quickly find the right chapter, it can really help you. So that whole process of, tabbing your books and carting in, 8, 9, 10 different documents into the exam, that's all gone away. And I think there's some pros and cons to that. If you go through that process of being very familiar with the hard copies, I think people who did that were generally pretty fast, at finding what they needed to find. Um, Whereas now it's all, electronic resources that, you do have a search feature, um, which could be faster, but at the same time, I think there's instances where you don't know the right search term, but maybe the right ballpark to be in, and folks, could maybe do that faster with a hard copy. But at any rate, that whole way of preparing hard copy materials has gone away. So now it's, being familiar with navigating through an electronic version of the documents. And the NCS reference is several hundred pages, and then you have all the NFPA codes and standards, which are references on the exam. According to the NCS, and I've gotten this straight from them, the exam could give you a full copy of any of the NFPA documents electronically, or they could also give you an excerpt from any of those documents, and that could be in the problem itself, or it could just be an excerpt as a PDF file, or using whatever electronic file viewer they're using during the exam. So, I think folks who took the first electronic exam last year had, it seems like their experience was one thing. But again, what I try to emphasize to my clients is that the NCS has left the door open that it could be any of those ways of delivering the reference to you. So you need to be prepared for all of them. But a number of key differences there with the way you go about looking up your references. Another important change is the addition of these alternative question types. And so Gus, you and I took the paper exam. So basically, for the entire history of the PE exam, it was all multiple choice with 4 answers, and you select one answer, right? Um, Now there are these alternative question types where they can give you more than 4 answers, and it could be select all that apply. So you might be selecting all 5 or all 4 instead of just one. They've also opened up these like ranking type questions where you might have to rank possible answers in order from greatest to smallest or something like that. Those are just a couple examples of these alternative question types, which I think it does. It opens up the exam to be a little more realistic to uh, actual situations which an engineer might encounter, right? So as you know, in the real world, it's you hardly ever encounter a situation where you're presented with here are the 4 possible answers, pick one. Usually it's a little bit more ambiguous than that, and I think these alternative question types might simulate something like that a little bit better. But it also does make it more challenging to prepare for because now, whereas previously it was you had a 1 in 4 shot of guessing the right answer, that's not necessarily the case anymore with these, select all that apply or put these answers in the right order with those question types. It just makes it a little bit different and something that you need to prepare for while you're studying.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I remember that they were talking about that when they were really discussing the transition into the computer-based testing and, the differences, highlighting the differences. And I think that sounds intimidating, select the point on this diagram that illustrates the flame jet or something to that extent where it's not a very maybe just not like A to B type of question, but I think it poses definitely a lot of interesting ways that the question could be asked or the types of questions that could be asked. I feel like it kind of busts so wide open. But one thing I did want to touch on was, you're talking about the references and codes and standards. I'd say a good piece of advice for people, all kind of people in all kind of roles take the FPE exam. So being comfortable with the NFPA documents and how they're laid out is a huge strength for the exam. So even if you do have the ability to search, having that background knowledge of how the codes and standards are set up and, knowing where the annex and the indices and just the different components and pieces of those NFPA documents is a huge way to give yourself an edge during the exam. So I like that point. I just wanted to touch on that again. Probably just a general note of like, wanting to like keep reaching people and keep growing the audience and the people who are taking the prep course is probably a big goal for you. But on top of that, I just am, kind of curious and fascinated about the whole thing and just wanted to talk about like what your ideas are for the future for the PE roadmap and just different kind of prep services and things. I'm sure you're in the thick of it now, so it might be hard to look outside of this round of the exam. But I also know that you're not one to rest on the last move or project that he did. So I'm sure that you have some ideas about the future and what you'd like to do with it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to continue to grow the PE prep side of things each year, and the goal is really to continue to put out good products that really help people to prepare for the exam well. And I think in the video series this year, I think at least so far I've been able to do that with these video solutions that I have been telling you about. Um, there are a number of other prep resources available. I've already mentioned some of the Meyer Fire materials earlier on, and then Obviously the SFP puts out a course, and there's some other providers that offer a full course as well. And I have gone back and forth, in thinking through would I want to do a course at some point in the future. Those courses that are, live instruction over the course of, 10 or 15 sessions are often they're pretty expensive, right? I think some of those with the materials can be over $2,000. So if your company is paying for that, that's great. But many people are in a situation where their company isn't willing to pay for that, or they're just, they would have to put that money up themselves. So um, I would love to continue to be able to offer resources that are really valuable, but also at a price point that are accessible for most people. And if it seems like in the future that doing some sort of course is feasible within those goals, then I'd be open to it. But haven't necessarily decided one way or the other. One thing that I have also gone back and forth on is one-on-one coaching. So last year, in addition to the roadmap study guide, I did offer a limited number of one-on-one exam coaching sessions, and those I think went really well. Got a lot of really good feedback. Um, I really do enjoy working with people one-on-one. I think you're able to connect with them and assist them in a much deeper and more meaningful way than all pre-recorded content. But at the same time, there is a limit to how much of that you can do, and your time is valuable. So you want to try to make sure you're using it in such a way that's making the most of your time. So those are just some thoughts for the future. Like I said, though, I do want to continue to grow it and try to find ways to offer more value to people. One of the competing things that I've got going on right now is that I did just start my own consulting business in January, and I have been putting a lot of time into that, certainly, as that's what I would consider my main work right now. So got a number of things competing for my time, I guess would be a good way to summarize it. But yeah, I do want to continue to grow the PE prep stuff as well as the building code blog in general.
Yeah, I understand, sir. I understand. I think you're like me in that it's not a question of which valuable pursuits do you have in your site. It's how much time do you have to allocate to the already good ideas that you have, trying to gain momentum and keep going. I kind of feel the same way as you in that regard. There's just so much time in the day, and you can only trade in so much of it. But before we move on to your professional space more, I guess they're both professional, but really more of the consulting side of things, I wanted to just ask you, I know that we have had so many good tips, tricks, and just ways to dissect, analyze like an engineer and attack the FPE exam, but I just wanted to ask you on the tail end of this little chunk about fire protection engineering PE exam. What's a piece of advice that you would give somebody who's going into it, who's maybe feeling a little bit daunted, or yeah. Want to take a moment to talk about our sponsor today, Walkter. Walkter is a family-owned business that provides services in many commercial and industrial market sectors, including electrical and fire alarm systems, the Internet of Things, digital transformation, and much, much more. Walkter is headquartered out of Lenexa, Kansas, but is decentralized in that they have technicians across the nation. They are looking for good candidates for fire alarm technicians in a variety of locations across the U.S. You can find out the details of these jobs and much more about Walkter on walkter.com/careers. That's WACHTER.com/careers. Let's get back to the show.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think just building on some of the items we had talked about earlier would be, set up that schedule early, the study schedule. And I would agree. I mean, the PE exam covers a huge range of content. Between all of the resources that are the reference standards, plus other resources like the NFPA and SFP handbooks, you've got thousands and thousands of pages of material that you could be tested on, and that can be really overwhelming for people. But the good news is that even seasoned fire protection engineers who have been in the industry for 20 or 30 years, they don't know everything. They don't know everything in the NFPA or SFP handbooks, but they are people who probably know where to go in order to find the answer to questions that are asked in the fire protection world. So if you can set up a study schedule and just stick to it, doing a little bit each week, I think in my conversations with people who have done well on the exam, folks who spend anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week are usually in a good position to pass the exam. Certainly, that commitment might ramp up in the month before the exam as you do more practice problems and maybe a full length practice exam. But um, I think if you're serious about taking the fire protection P exam, you should just be willing to allocate at least that amount of time per week. And if you're willing to do that, I think you have a good shot at passing. Building on that, I would say too is that it is a season and it's going to pass. I remember when I was studying, I had to give up a lot of time with my wife and doing other things that I would have loved to have been doing. But that time passes, and when you pass the exam, it's definitely worth it. And one of the great things in the professional engineering world is that once you pass the PE, you generally should never have to take it again, barring some crazy circumstance. So get it out of the way once, and if you stay in the engineering field your whole career, that could be the last exam you ever have to take. So set that steady schedule up early and chip away at it week by week, and you should be in a good position to pass.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I think that I took a prep course, and yeah, I mean, like the they're so expensive. I mean, like the big full length courses that you're talking about, and you know, uh, having that mentality of being able to sit down and schedule it out is a huge pro. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I just think about people who are maybe not as like organized in that regard. It's even more important to kind of write it down and keep yourself accountable. And one thing that I always like to mention is try to find that community. That we've talked a lot about those Meyer fire problems, but there's a leaderboard, and people getting together on those problems and discussing the problems. And so maybe that could be a community for you too. It help you keep accountable and help you keep on track as far as the PE exam space.
Yeah, I would agree. The community is important. I didn't mention that, but I definitely had some other people, who were in the same boat as me, getting ready to take the exam that I would do some study sessions with, or even call them up occasionally to ask some questions about, hey, I had trouble with this problem or this concept. Plus, too, I mean, if you're doing it alone, if you stick to, let's say, if you're even just doing 5 hours a week, and you start 20 weeks out, I mean, that's 100 hours. It's just a lot of time to be studying, alone in a library or in your basement or wherever you're doing it. So, if you can find someone to do that with on occasion, it really, I think it improves the quality and the the
Yeah,
experience of your study time.
without a doubt, it can be rough. It can be rough, and sometimes if you're just studying in a bubble, you even if you are doing good, you might be like questioning it. You're starting to get a Stockholm syndrome from studying in a room too long, but wondering like if the test is turning on you, if you're just beating it up. But yeah,
Right.
that's ridiculous. But that
Yeah.
it can definitely feel like that. But I wanted to, yeah, definitely to break into your consulting side of things that you've gotten into. You've been in the consulting field for, I think, like a decade or more, and so you just recently kind of started your own firm. I'd love to hear more about that and what's been going on the last year.
Yeah. So in January of this year, I was previously with Arup, which is a large, multidisciplinary engineering firm in their Washington D.C. office, and I left Arup and started my own consulting firm and doing the same services that I had been doing previously. So, life safety and building code consulting, probably the biggest one, but also doing fire protection design as well as performance based design. So, fire modeling, egress modeling, smoke control, things of that nature. And Gus, I mean, it was a huge journey to get to that point. I think I've had an entrepreneurial desire for really as long as I can remember. And prior to starting my own company, I had a number of different side projects, side hustles that I think were really good experiences to kind of scratch that itch and also test the water, so to speak. So, a few examples that come to mind is, a couple years out of college, I was got into this beef jerky side hustle where I was selling beef jerky on the side, so completely unrelated to engineering. But that was just a really good experience of learning about, sourcing products, delivering products to clients, how to set up a website to accept payments, and dealing with customer service. A little bit after that, I was also selling some things on Amazon. I think a lot of people have at least heard of folks who do that. Creating a product or even just reselling things on Amazon. There's a lot of information online about that. But again, that was just a interesting experience in marketing as well as the business side of things and doing taxes for a business and some of the other administrative things that come along with a business. And then most recently, before I made this jump full time, I was doing the building code blog as a side project, and that really just started as an outlet for me to write about code topics that I found interesting. And apart from the PE roadmap stuff that I sell on there, I wasn't actually monetizing that initially. But again, just a really good experience in setting up a website and kind of doing something where you're creating a new platform or a new source of content for your clients. But all those things, kind of led me to this point of getting these small experiences along the way of doing little side entrepreneurial things. And then, in this January and the period right before that, I came to this decision that I felt like I knew enough in the fire protection world that I could go out on my own. And that certainly doesn't mean that I don't have more to learn. I think, you should be learning, your whole career for sure. And fire protection is such a broad field that there's an endless number of things that you could learn about. But within the areas that I typically operate in, I felt like I was at a pretty comfortable and confident point with my technical skill that I could make that jump on my own. Another big piece that was really exciting for me is I really enjoy interacting with and serving my clients. And you certainly can do that when working for a company. But I think going out on your own, you're really then relying on those client relationships because, your clients are who pay your bills. And when you're on your own company, if you have no clients, you don't have a business. So it went from, a pretty important thing when I was with another company in terms of managing client relationships to now it's probably the most important thing for my business is to ensure that I'm serving my clients well. So that could, sound like a daunting task, and at times it is challenging, but it's also a really exciting thing too. It means that I get to, try to set up my business and operate it in such a way that it's really looking to serve my clients and give them a good experience. And that's something that really excites me. Like I would love all of my clients to really enjoy working with me, knowing that I provide certainly good technical service, but also a great customer experience, and that they know that they can call me, that I'm going to answer them promptly. I'm going to, give them good advice, whether it's on the building code or a fire protection question. and just in general that they're going to enjoy working with me. So um, I'm really excited to get to do that and to shape my business in such a way that I can really focus it on doing those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool that, and it's appeared, and it's like coming to my consciousness as well. Starting to have the podcast, and all you are is this outward facing interaction with the people who are the stakeholders, which is the audience, and then the clients. About how much different that is from when you work at a company. And I might only work in production and might not even have any interface with the client. And then like how different those two fields are. And that sort of eat what you kill mentality of entrepreneurship is definitely something that I think is awesome, and just have seen in my short stint with the podcast. But yeah, I love hearing about that. It's cool to hear about you making your own way and dealing with customers, and kind of facilitating design on your own terms, but also being beholden in a different way than you were used to the client sort of things. So yeah, I think that's really neat to hear about.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey so far. Um, and I think I'm off to a really good start, and I'm excited for where the future holds and where it's going to take me. Um, I would also though point out that I think that there are some definite challenges in starting your own business, and any entrepreneur I think can relate to this, in that it is scary to go out on your own. Um, most people start their career working for a company, which means that you have a either a salary or some sort of hourly rate that you're making, and basically, as long as you show up to work, you are going to get paid that amount. Whereas, when you go off on your own, you're giving up that guaranteed salary or guaranteed pay, because for the first, you know, first many days, weeks, or months of starting your own business, you could be working nonstop and you're not going to make any money to start. So, giving up that security of a guaranteed paycheck is a challenge for sure, and definitely something you have to plan for. I have a family um, that I provide for, and certainly I'm not going to put them in a position where I'm just gambling on, am I going to be able to pay our bills on time. So there is obviously a risk with any sort of entrepreneurial venture, but I think most people would do well to prepare in advance for that by saving some money in advance that you can live on for the first few months while you get things off the ground. Another thing that's been a challenge is uh, just kind of the missing resources that you have with the company. So one example for that would be when you work for a larger company and you have a question, whether it's a technical question or maybe it's a administrative question about filling out some form or something, whatever it is, there's typically a lot of people that you can go to. And Gus, you probably have that at your company, where if you have a sprinkler question that you don't know the answer to, you can call someone up real quick or type in a chat and typically get an answer fairly quickly. You lose some degree of that when you're an entrepreneur, because you no longer have coworkers, at least at the start, where you can ask all these questions, and that can be a challenge for sure. I think I've been really fortunate to be a part of a group of other fire protection entrepreneurs. Joe Meyer would be one. I talked about him earlier, and I think you've had Dave Stacy on this
Yeah.
podcast. So Dave and I went to the University of Maryland together, and he started his company a couple years before me, but he's been a great resource. Another guy is Brandon Wilkerson out in the Midwest, who started his own engineering company a couple years ago. He's been an awesome resource. So those guys, they're not my coworkers per se, but they've in many ways have filled that role, because those are the guys that I'll reach out to when I have random one-off questions. So it is a journey for sure, but yeah, there's some challenges, like I was saying there, that I think they're hard at first, but ultimately they add to the satisfaction when you can, work through those things and continue to grow your company and make it as an entrepreneur. So I think just something to point out. It's not all easy trails, especially the first few months of starting a company.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I was just thinking about the other day, like just like transmittals and just like all the construction administration, like processing and everything that has to go on for projects is like a huge task in itself. So it's just like all those little tasks that you might have had a whole department for at a large company, and then you become accounting, you become marketing, you become, you know, all of the above. So it's definitely seems daunting for sure to hear about, just like to have to encompass all of that. Um, but that's awesome. I like hearing about it, and yeah, I know Brandon Wilkerson's part of my local SFPE chapter, so
Okay.
he's one of the first people I had come speak about like uh, what it is to be a fire protection engineer when I was going to school. So that's funny that you mentioned him. I can remember Brandon Wilkerson uh, shucking and jiving, talking about a military hangar that he had done when I was still a student, and I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "This guy is incredible." I was like, "What is going on?" Um,
Yeah, that's
so
great. No, Brandon's a great guy. That's great that you got to hear from him, when you were younger.
yeah, so I wanted to pick your brain here at the end. Uh, just talk to you about like what kind of trends you see right now in the industry, or you could take it from the PE prep space or just your consulting, like just kind of what you see going on in design or just your life in general.
Sure, a couple things that come to mind. Maybe starting in the construction space would be a big push for sustainability, and that's not a new trend by any means, but I think that it's a trend that's gotten a lot more traction in recent years. From a building code standpoint, in the 2021 International Building Code (IBC), um, the Type 4 construction, which has historically just been heavy timber, was completely overhauled, and there's now a Type 4A, 4B, and 4C construction, which allows for mass timber construction. And in the case of Type 4A, you can go up to, I believe it's 18 stories or 270 feet. Don't quote me on those exact numbers, but that's the ballpark. Which is way taller than you could previously build a wood building. So, that's the codes really catching up to this push from a broad base of people wanting to see more sustainable construction practices allowed in the code. So I think that now that that's been codified, and as jurisdictions begin to adopt the 2021 IBC, I do think you're going to see more tall wood buildings. Um, the number of mass timber buildings in the U.S. continues to grow, and I think it will continue to expand exponentially, if I had to guess. So that would be a big one. Similarly, with other ICC codes like the Energy Conservation Code or the Green Building Codes, there are um, increasing energy efficiency requirements that are put into the code each cycle. And I think all that will really culminate in many jurisdictions, if they haven't already, putting forward these net zero requirements where new buildings that are built, have to have a net zero contribution to whether it's putting carbon into the atmosphere or maybe just global warming in general. And, some cities have already set a goal for that, and I think many are doing it off in the distance. Let's say like in the year 2050, but some have put a much more aggressive goal like 2040 or 2030. But I think as the coming years, um, you know, as we get into the coming years, and more codes are going to allow and or require greener buildings, we're going to see more and more of that put forth. So definitely a trend to keep in mind, and certainly folks who are in the code consulting world, that's going to be, I think, a big part of what we do is uh, adopting our code advice to clients in order to help them meet um, these various sustainability initiatives, particularly as it pertains to the construction of the building and the protection of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've seen a big surge recently too in sustainability, and so I can definitely resonate with that sentiment. Um, just seeing how the different alternative energies and materials for buildings has been pushed for sure. What have you seen as far as all of these escalations in material? How has been your experience with the price of commodities? It's been such a whirlwind ride for all my projects, and dealing with the escalations in steel, concrete, glass, adhesives, computer chips for fire alarm panels. It just seems like borderline across the board. We've seen some miraculous hike in materials.
Yeah, certainly have experienced that, and I've actually had a number of projects that I'm working on go on hold because seemingly out of nowhere, the cost estimates have gone through the roof, particularly with lumber prices. Um, yeah, so I mean that is kind of a crazy phenomenon to just have that happen so quickly. Obviously a lot of that coincided with the beginning of the pandemic, but yeah, I mean a really kind of uh, unprecedented, at least to my knowledge, spike in the cost of wood, which is really challenging, especially for smaller buildings, like single family homes or just even smaller commercial buildings that the primary material is wood. I mean that can really crush the whole project. I've got some friends who were in the process of building a home for themselves, and the price of their house went up over $100,000 in the span
Jeez.
of a couple weeks, right? Which is just for a single family home, that's like that might completely make it out of your price range for many people. So um, you're seeing the impacts even on a smaller scale, which is pretty crazy. Hopefully that, I think that has died down some, and hopefully will continue, back to, kind of pre-pandemic pricing levels. Um, the impact of that is big. Wood is, it is a renewable material, and it's certainly much better for the environment than other non-renewable construction materials. So, kind of having that almost unavailable for a period of time due to the high price, I think is a challenge for really all parts of the construction market.
Yeah,
In terms of other materials, I certainly have been, I've heard on the news the shortage in computer chips and whatnot. I can't say that I've seen a direct impact of that yet. But certainly, in other industries like the auto industry, for example, know of some production shortages and things like that, where it's been, companies have had to reduce the number of cars they're making because they can't get enough chips for the car, that sort of situation. But yeah, certainly, I mean, if that continues, a building has a surprising number of computers in it, whether it's just the building automation system or fire alarm panels or uh, you know even controls for fans and air handling units. Those all have computer chips in them. And yeah, I mean, if that continues, certainly you might expect to see a price increase or a time delay in getting those things in buildings.
for sure. That's all great points. Well, Chris, I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really think we laid down some FPE prep gold here in the first 30 minutes, and then got to round it out with some interesting consulting practice information as well. So just want to say thanks, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Gus. I appreciate you having me. And just to follow up on what you mentioned at the beginning, if folks listening are still looking for some PE exam prep materials, would definitely recommend the Joe Meyer's Fire Prep Guide and Prep Series, which you can find on his website, meyerfire.com. And then the video roadmap series that we talked about at the beginning, you can find that buildingcode.blog/PE-roadmap. So we would definitely recommend checking those out, and certainly wish people who are studying for the exam best of luck as they take that in October.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be sure to throw some links down in the show notes for those who are interested and want to go check out more on the subject. But that's great.
All right. Well, thanks again, Gus, for having me. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.